They laughed when I said I'd be a doctor. Last week I operated on my father's heart. The ore lights were so bright they made the edges of everything look unreal, like the room was drawn in sharp lines instead of lived in. I stood at the sink scrubbing up to my elbows, watching pink water spiral down the drain, trying to keep my breathing steady while the charge nurse read out my name and role like it was any other case. My hands didn't feel like mine. They felt like tools I was borrowing. The smell of chlorhexidine was strong enough to sting the back of my throat, and through the double doors I could hear the steady, impatient beeping of the monitors that didn't care whose chest was about to be opened. When I stepped into the room, gowned and gloved, my eyes went to the table automatically. Dad's face was half covered, lashes resting on his cheeks, mouth slightly open from the tube, and for a second my brain tried to shove a memory over it. Him in his recliner, yelling at the TV, asking me if I'd finally gotten a real job yet. Instead, I saw the blue surgical drape and the thin strip of skin left visible, and I felt my stomach tighten like a fist. "Claire?" Dr. Patel asked through his mask, eyes calm. "You good to assist?" My voice came out lower than I expected. "Yes," I said, and then, because I needed to anchor myself to something real, I added, "Let's do it." It was a Tuesday night years ago when they first laughed. Like an actual laugh, the kind that makes you feel stupid for even speaking. We were at my aunt's house for dinner, one of those loud family meals where everyone talks over each other and the table is too small so you're always bumping knees. I was 17, still in my fast food uniform because I'd come straight from a shift, hair smelling like fryer oil no matter how much I washed it. Someone asked what I wanted to do after graduation, and I said it quickly, like I could get it out before I chickened out. "I'm going to be a doctor." My uncle snorted. My cousin actually choked on her drink. Dad leaned back in his chair like he'd been waiting for me to say something ridiculous. "A doctor," he repeated, amused. "With what money? With what grades?" My mom gave that tight smile she used when she didn't want conflict. "Maybe something more realistic," she murmured. Dad tapped his fork against his plate and said, loud enough for the whole table, "She gets queasy watching the news. She's not cutting anybody open." Everyone laughed again, and my face burned so hot I could barely swallow. That dinner wasn't the worst moment, just the clearest. Dad had a way of taking my goals and turning them into a joke he could repeat at parties. He called it keeping me humble. I called it learning to keep my dreams quiet. My brother, Ethan, was the golden one. Good at sports, good at making Dad proud in ways Dad understood. I was the one who read too much, asked too many questions, and had the nerve to want a life that didn't look like the one we came from. When I got into college, Dad said, "Don't rack up debt for some fantasy." When I started working 2 jobs to cover tuition, he said, "Must be nice to have time for all that." When I got accepted into med school, he didn't come to the little celebration my friends threw me. He texted, "Congrats. Don't forget where you came from." It sounds like it could be sentimental. From him, it was a warning. But here's what makes it complicated. My dad wasn't a monster. He just didn't know how to be proud without feeling threatened by it. He grew up with the idea that the world hands you your lane and you stay in it. He worked at a plant for 3 decades, hands rough, back constantly sore, and he wore his exhaustion like proof of worth. In his head, my ambition wasn't inspiring. It was an accusation. Like if I could climb out, it meant he chose not to. So I became a doctor anyway, mostly out of spite at first, then out of love for the work. I learned anatomy until it lived behind my eyes. I learned how to talk to scared people without lying to them. I learned how to keep my face steady when a family member is sobbing in a hallway. I learned how to go home after a brutal shift and still wash my dishes because life doesn't pause for your trauma. I also learned that certain lines shouldn't be crossed. In residency, one of the attendings said, casually, "Rule of thumb, don't treat your own family if you can avoid it. You'll lose your mind." Everyone laughed like it was a joke. I filed it away as a rule that would never apply to me because life is long and hospitals are big, and what are the odds? Then, last week, my phone rang at 3:12 a.m. while I was half asleep on my couch, still in scrubs, shoes kicked off but not even untied. The caller ID showed my mom. I knew before I answered that something was wrong because my mom never calls that late unless someone is dying. When I picked up, she didn't even say hello. She just said my name like it was a lifeline. "Claire," she whispered, and I could hear sirens faintly through the speaker like a soundtrack. "It's your dad." He collapsed. "They're taking him to St. Mary's." St. Mary's is my hospital. I sat up so fast my vision blurred. "What happened?" I asked, already moving, already pulling my hair back with one hand.
My mom's voice was shaking. "He was sweating," she said.
He said his chest hurt. Then she broke into sobs and I heard Ethan in the background trying to talk to paramedics, his voice tight with panic. I drove to the hospital with my hands locked on the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. The streets were empty and wet, reflecting streetlights in long streaks. My mind did this awful split. One part of me was my dad's daughter, terrified and small. The other part was the doctor, running through protocols, rehearsing the questions I'd ask, bracing for the answers. When I got to the ED, I saw him immediately. Dad on a gurney, skin grayish under harsh lights, sweat on his temples, jaw clenched like he was trying to out stubborn pain itself. His eyes flicked toward me and narrowed, confused, like he couldn't place me in that context. Then he recognized me, and something shifted in his face, fear, then relief, then pride so quick it almost looked like pain. "Claire," he rasped, and the sound of my name from him like that hit me harder than any insult ever had. The cardiology team moved fast. Words flew around the room. Pressure, troponins, EKG changes. I stood just far enough away not to interfere, forcing myself to be useful without hijacking. Ethan arrived with Mom, white-faced. Mom grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. "Do something," she whispered. "Please." I had to look at her and say the words I've said to so many families. They're doing everything. Right now we wait for the next step. The next step came like a punch. Dad needed surgery. Not sometime soon. Not Will's schedule. He needed it now. There was a complication that made it riskier, and the on-call team was stretched thin because another case had come in. In a perfect world, I would have been nowhere near the operating room. In a perfect world, I would have been in a waiting area holding my brother's hand and letting someone else carry the clinical weight. But the world doesn't care about perfect. Dr. Patel, the attending cardiac surgeon on call, pulled me aside. "Your family," he said, voice careful. "You don't have to be in there." "I know," I said, and my mouth felt numb. "But do you need another set of hands?" He looked at me for a long second, the kind of look doctors give when they're measuring not your skill but your stability. "We could use you as first assist," he said. "Only if you can keep it professional.
Only if you want to.
And we'll document everything." I thought of Dad's face, the way he'd looked at me when he recognized me. I thought of my mom's grip on my arm. I thought of my own body betraying me with fear. And I heard myself say, "I want to." The hardest part wasn't the surgery itself. I won't describe the technical details because that isn't the point, and also because nothing about that room felt like something that belonged to a story. It felt like a vow. The hardest part was the moments around it. Hearing the anesthesiologist confirm his name and date of birth while Dad was still awake enough to answer. Watching Dad's eyes track to me and soften. Feeling him squeeze my fingers weakly when I leaned in and said, "I'm here." Hearing him whisper, "I'm sorry," so quietly I almost missed it. "I know," I whispered back, because I didn't have time to unpack what he meant. "Save your energy." Outside Mom tried to stop me. "Claire, honey," she said, crying, "you can't, what if?" She couldn't finish the sentence. Ethan looked like he'd been hollowed out. "Are you sure?" he asked me, voice breaking. "If something goes wrong." "I'm sure," I said, even though my hands were shaking and my mouth tasted like I'd chewed aspirin. "Dr. Patel is leading."
"I'm assisting."
"He's the best we have tonight. I trust him." Ethan swallowed, eyes glossy. "Dad always said you'd never make it," he blurted suddenly, like the stress cracked something open. Then he looked horrified, like he'd insulted me in a moment when we didn't have room for old wounds. I didn't mean. I know what he said, I replied, and my voice stayed gentle. We can talk later. In the OR, I became a version of myself I didn't know I had. Focused, quiet, useful. There were moments when I caught myself thinking, that's his chest. That's my dad, and I shoved those thoughts aside like closing a drawer. Afterward, when it was over, when the monitors steadied and the room exhaled, I stepped back and realized my legs were trembling beneath the drape line where no one could see. Dr. Patel looked at me and nodded once, a small gesture that felt enormous. Good work, he said. I left the OR and peeled off my gloves like I was taking off someone else's skin. In the hallway, I leaned my forehead against the cool wall and let myself breathe for the first time in what felt like days. My scrubs were damp at the collar. My ears rang with the memory of alarms and voices and the relentless hum of machines. When I walked into the waiting area, Mom shot up so fast she nearly tripped. Is he? She began. He made it through, I said, and the words wobbled at the end because relief is its own kind of weakness. Mom collapsed into a sob that sounded like it came from the bottom of her body. Ethan covered his face with his hands and made this broken, laughing noise that scared me for a second until I realized it was just grief leaving his system. Later, when Dad was stable enough for a short visit, I went in alone. The ICU smelled like antiseptic and warm plastic. Machines clicked softly. Dad looked smaller in the bed, the stubbornness temporarily replaced by exhaustion. His eyes opened when I stepped closer. Hey, I said softly. His gaze held mine, clearer than I expected. You did it, he rasped. I swallowed because there were so many it's in that sentence. We did. I corrected because I meant it. The team did. Dad's mouth twitched like he was trying to smile and couldn't quite manage it. He stared at the ceiling for a moment, then turned his head slightly toward me. I used to talk, he said, and his voice cracked like it hurt to admit. I thought if I laughed, it would keep you close to the ground. He swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing. I didn't want you to get hurt. I sat down in the chair beside his bed and rested my hand lightly on the blanket near his wrist, not on his skin because there were tubes and tape and fragile boundaries everywhere. You did hurt me, I said, quietly, because pretending otherwise would be another form of lying. But I kept going anyway. His eyes got wet and it made something in my chest ache in a way I didn't have a name for. I'm proud of you, he whispered. I should have said it before. I nodded once slow, because if I spoke I might fall apart. I know. I managed. The next day, when I was leaving after a long shift, I passed a group of nurses at the desk and overheard one of them say, That's Dr. Whitman, the one whose dad is in ICU. They said it like a fact, not gossip, not mockery. I kept walking, my badge swinging against my chest, and I felt something settle into place. Not victory, not revenge, just a strange, quiet completion. Dad is still recovering. There are hard days. There are small improvements. There's still a lot we haven't talked about because he gets tired and I get busy and life doesn't pause to give you perfect closure. But when he says my name now, he says it like he means it. And when I look at him, I don't feel like that 17-year-old girl at the dinner table anymore. I feel like someone who built herself out of doubt and exhaustion and stubborn hope. Thanks for watching. If you've ever had people laugh at your dream and then life turned around and made them witness it up close, share your story in the comments. I really would love to hear it.